We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Lamed Ches Amid Beis in Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 138b. The Gemara here is continuing a brisa. The brisa says that if a shchimera says, "Give to my wife 200 zuz bichsubasa," so then Yoda al Yona in this case as well, she has the upper hand. Ratzon otzlason, if she wants, she can take the 200 zuz. Ratzon otelas ksubasa, if she wants, she can take her ksuba. She takes whatever is the larger amount. And the brisa continues, if a shchimera, someone on his deathbed says, give 200 zuz to so-and-so, who I owe money to, and give him karoilo as is fit to him, so then notlon vinota leschovo. So then we say that the Baal Chov, the creditor, can collect the 200 zuz and also collect the debt that he's owed. V'yamamar bechovo, and if he says that you should give him 200 zuz bechovo as a payment for the debt which I owe him, so then notlon bechovo. So then again, the creditor will collect it, and that will be a collection of the debt. And the Gemara now says, Mishum da'amar karoi lo, in all of these cases, from the fact that he says this phrase karoi lo, notalon v'notal eschovo, that means he takes the money and he also collects the debt. And this question would apply to the other cases in the Bryce as well. The karoi lo means you take the 200 zuz plus whatever is owed. V'dilma karoi lo bechovo kamar. Doesn't karoi lo, isn't it possible that karoi lo means that you should pay him the 200 zuz as a payment for the debt? How do you know that it means in addition to the debt? And the Gemara says, and the Rashba mentioned this on the previous Amud, Amar Rav Nachman says, Amar li Huna, Huna said to me, Hamani, who is the author of this brisa? Rabbi Akiva, it's Rabbi Akiva, Dedayak Lishna Yisera. Rabbi Akiva, he makes inferences from the extra language. The words karoilo are extra, they're not necessary, and therefore we can understand from those extra words that the person means to say to give him the money plus whatever is owed. As the Gemara continues, D'Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, V'lo es habor, v'lo es hados, when a person sells a house, that does not include selling the bor and the dos, it does not include selling the pit and the cistern, Aval bisha kasav lo umka v'ruma, even though he wrote into the document of sale that he's selling the house and its depths and its heights, so you might have thought that includes the bor, that includes the dos, but it does not include that. The seller keeps the bor and the dos. V'tzarech likach lo derech divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says that the seller does need to purchase the rights for a path to get to the bor, to get to the dos. He doesn't automatically get a path within the property that he's selling. The Chachamim say, Ein sarach likach lo derech. He doesn't need to purchase the rights for a path. He gets that automatically. And the Mishnah continues, Umoder Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva admits, Bizman sha'amar lo chutz me'elu. If the seller said to the buyer that I'm selling you the house with the exception of these, with the exception of the bor and with the exception of the dos, so then she'eno tzarach likach lo derech. So then the seller does not need to purchase the rights for a path, because those extra words of chutz me'elu, that means to say that not only is the seller keeping the bor, he's also keeping the rights to a path to get to the bor. And so the Gemara says, Alma, we see from this, Kevan de lo tzarach, since this is something that was added that was not necessary, Rabbi Akiva holds v'kamar, and he says what was not necessary, l'tfuye milsakasi, it's obviously coming to add something. That's what we see from Rabbi Akiva in this Mishnah. So hachanami, so over here also with the words karoilo, kevan de lo tzarach v'kamar, since this is something that's not necessary to be stated, but he does say it, l'tfuye milsakasi, it's coming to add something on, and that's why again this brisa follows Rabbi Akiva. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Shchimera sha'amar mona yeshli etzel ploni. If a shchimera, someone on his deathbed, he says that I'm owed a moneh from so-and-so, ha'edim kosvin, so the witnesses can write down what he says, afal pishein makir, and even though they don't recognize that this is true, they don't know that it's true, it's still okay for them to record that the shchimera said that he was owed some money. Lefikach, therefore, kishu gova, when that money is collected, tzarech l'haviraya, he needs to bring evidence. We don't rely on the document, the witnesses are just writing down, recording what the shchimera said, but they're not testifying to the fact that the money is actually owed. Divrei Rabbi Meir, those are the words of Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim and the Chachamim say, Ein kosvin, ela imkein makirin, the witnesses should not write anything down unless they recognize, unless they really know that the money is owed. Lefikach, therefore, kishugova, when the person collects the money, Ein sarach laviraya, he doesn't need to bring any further evidence. The document that the witnesses wrote up, that will be sufficient evidence. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Nachman says, Amar li Huna, Huna said to me that it's actually the opposite in terms of who said what. Tana, that it was taught as follows, Rabbi Meir Omer Ein Kosvin. Rabbi Meir is the one that says that we do not write down that we do not write it down, we don't record it. The Chachamim Omerim Kosvin, and the Chacham are the ones that say that we do write the document even if we do not recognize, even if we don't know for sure that the money is owed. So essentially Rav Nachman reverses the opinions of Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. V'af Rabbi Meir lo amar, and even Rabbi Meir, he only said that we don't write it. Why? Ela mishum bezdin toin. The reason why he doesn't want to write up the document unless they know for sure that the money is owed is because of a concern that a subsequent bezdin might make a mistake. They might rely on the document thinking that the first bezdin knew that the money was owed, or really the first edim, the first witnesses knew that the money was owed, and so therefore, since we have that concern that the bezdin will make that error, therefore the witnesses should not write anything unless they know for certain that the money is owed. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Dimi min Hardoi. Rav Dimi min Hardoi says, Hilchas of the halacha is ein choshen lebezin to, and we are not concerned that a later bezin is going to make a mistake and rely on the document without making sure that the money is actually owed. But the Gemara continues, Umayishna midarava. But if the halacha is we're not concerned that a bezin will make such an error, what's the difference between that and the following case of Rava? Diyamar Rava, because Rava says, ein cholzin el imkein makir, and a bezin cannot preside over a chalitza unless they recognize the yavam and the yavama. V'ein memanin, also they can't preside over a refusal. That's talking about a girl who's a minor who was married and then she refuses when she becomes mature. Again, they can't preside over that el imkein makir unless they recognize those involved. Lefikach, therefore, kosvin get chalitza v'get miyon v'afal pi shein makir, and therefore it's okay that we should write up a get of chalitza or a get of miyon even though we don't recognize, because we can rely on what that earlier bezdin did. And so the Gemara says, Mishum dechoshen lebezdin toin, isn't the reason for all of this because we are concerned that a bezdin will make a mistake, meaning a subsequent bezdin will rely on it, and therefore we have to make sure that the initial chalitza, the initial miyon, is done only in a situation where the bezdin recognize those who are participating. And the Gemara says, Lo, no, you can't bring a proof to our case, because in this case over here, by the chalitza and the miyon, bezdin basar bezdina lo daiki, one court following another court, they're not going to be so careful. If a second court sees what the first court does, they'll assume that everything was done properly, and therefore we have to make sure that the first court does everything properly. However, in our case, Beis Dina Basar Edim, when we're talking about a court that is following witnesses, in this case again, the Shchimeira said that he was owed money, and witnesses are the one that are writing down, that are recording what they heard. So when the Bezin is following up on what the witnesses wrote down, Daiki, they're going to make sure that what was written down is actually accurate, and that's why we don't have to be concerned for a Bezdin Toin in the case of a Bezdin that is following what witnesses recorded. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Ha'av tole shumachil l'chol misha yirtza. This is going back on the previous case. Let's say a father wrote over his property to one of his sons, and the idea was that the father will continue to take the produce from the property until he dies, and then the son will take over the property fully, will take the produce as well. So the father is allowed to detach any produce, and he can give it to whomever he wants, because he owns all of the produce that comes from that property. Umasha hiniach tolish. Now let's say the father dies, whatever he leaves over that's already been detached, Harehu shel Yarsh, and that belongs to all of the heirs. It doesn't just belong to this particular son. Again, once it was detached from the ground, it's not part of the property specifically to the son. It belongs to the father and then is distributed evenly among all of the Yarshin. And the Gemara says, Tolosh in mechuberlo. It sounds like this is true only of detached produce and not that which is attached to the ground. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph.